The champagne flute felt cold in my hand, a stark contrast to the warm, humid air of our backyard filled with smiling faces. My daughter's 1-month celebration should have been the happiest day of my life. Little Chloe slept peacefully in my mother's arms, a tiny pink bow in her peach fuzz hair. Across the lawn, my husband Brandon laughed with a group of his college friends, his tie loosened, his face already flushed from whiskey. I was making my way toward him with a slice of vanilla cake when I saw his expression change. His laughter died mid-sentence. His face, animated and bright moments before, went slack then pale. He stared at his phone as if it had bitten him. "Brandon." I approached, my heels sinking into the soft grass. "Is everything okay?" He didn't hear me. He was locked onto that screen, his knuckles white around his phone. One of his friends, Mark, clapped him on the shoulder, saying something low. I caught the name. Nora. Nora Finch. The name was a ghost in our marriage, a whisper from a past I could never touch. Brandon's first love. "She just finalized her divorce," Mark said, not noticing me standing there. "Pretty messy from what I hear. Lost everything." Something inside me, something that had weathered 7 years of marriage and the beautiful, terrifying journey of new motherhood, cracked open. Brandon looked up, his eyes meeting mine, but they weren't seeing me. They were seeing a memory, a road not taken, a damsel in distress 600 miles away. "I need a drink," he muttered, brushing past me. For the next hour I watched him self-destruct. He moved from whiskey to straight bourbon, gulping it like water. The gracious host vanished, replaced by a sullen, agitated stranger. Our guests began to notice, their glances bouncing from his hunched form at the bar to my strained smile. My best friend Kendra sidled up to me. "Jess, what's going on with Dan?" "Nora Finch got divorced," I said, the words tasting like ash. Kendra's eyes widened in understanding, then hardened in anger. "Oh hell no. Not today. Not here." But it was too late. The party was winding down, the sunset painting the sky in oranges and purples. As the last of our relatives pulled out of the driveway, Brandon stumbled toward the hall closet, yanking out his leather jacket. "Where do you think you're going?" I asked, blocking the doorway to the garage. Chloe was finally asleep in her bassinet upstairs. The house was a mess of empty plates and half-full glasses. My body ached with the deep, profound tiredness of new motherhood. "I have to go," he slurred, his breath a wave of alcohol. "She needs me. Nora, she's all alone." He said, "She still loves me. She's waiting." The sheer, breathtaking delusion of it stole my voice. He was a married man with a newborn daughter, drunk out of his mind, planning to drive through the night to rescue a woman he hadn't seen in a decade. "You're not driving anywhere," I said, my voice low and surprisingly steady. "You're drunk. You have a family here." "You don't understand," he roared, the sound echoing in the quiet house. "You've never understood what we had. She's lost everything. And what am I?" The question screamed silently in my head. "What is this life we built? What is our daughter?" I saw it then, the fanatical light in his eyes. This wasn't just a nostalgic whim. This was a man possessed by a fantasy, ready to burn down his real life for a ghost. In that moment something in me broke for good. The love, the hope, the willingness to fight. It snapped. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I swallowed the tears that threatened to choke me, clenched my jaw until it ached, and walked to the phone. I called his parents, Frank and Susan Davis. My voice was calm, eerily detached. "Please come over. It's an emergency. And bring your lawyer's number." Then I turned to Brandon, who was fumbling with his car keys. "If you walk out that door to go to her," I said, each word an ice chip, "we are done. It's over." He scoffed, a drunken, ugly sound. "Don't be dramatic, Maya." His parents arrived 20 minutes later, their faces etched with concern that quickly turned to horror as they took in their intoxicated son, his packed duffel bag by the door, his ranting about true love and destiny. They managed to corral him to take his keys. He passed out on the couch, muttering Nora's name. I didn't sleep. I sat in the nursery watching Chloe's chest rise and fall, my mind a silent, chaotic storm. The next morning the hangover and the reality hit Brandon at the same time. He was groggy, defensive until he checked his phone. He went very still. Then he scrambled up, his eyes wild. He'd seen it. A post from Nora. A carefully staged image. Vague, unsettling, designed to look like a quiet cry for help. He made a sound like a wounded animal. And then he moved with a speed that terrified me. He stormed past me into the nursery where my mother was cooing at Chloe. He didn't speak. He just snatched our daughter from her grandmother's arms. "Brandon, what are you doing?" my mother cried out. He rushed out of the nursery with Chloe in his arms, his movements clumsy and unsteady, heading down the hall toward the open bedroom doors. "You want me to feel loss?" he shouted hoarsely, his voice breaking under a pain that wasn't his to claim. He stumbled near the open balcony doors, his grip shaking as Chloe began to cry. I didn't think. I launched myself at him, grabbing for my child. There was a struggle, a blur of terror and rage. He shoved me away, but I clung to Chloe, wrenching her from his grasp. The momentum carried us backward. My heel caught on the balcony threshold. The world tilted. In that frozen instant, instinct took over. I twisted my body, shielding my daughter as we fell backward, my body taking the full impact. Numbing wave of pain that swallowed light and sound and thought. I gasped, my eyes flying open. A wave of nausea washed over me, but there was no pain. Only the crisp chill of a champagne flute in my hand. The warm, humid air of our backyard. The sound of laughter. I stood frozen, disoriented. On the lawn. At Nora's 1-month celebration. My mother was a few feet away, holding a sleeping Chloe with the tiny pink bow. And across the yard, Brandon was laughing with his friends, his tie loose. I saw Mark lean in. I saw Brandon's face change, go slack, then pale as he stared at his phone. It wasn't a dream. The sensation of the fall, the crushing impact, the blinding pain, was carved into my muscle memory. My legs trembled weakly. I knew. With a certainty that chilled my soul, I knew. I had lived this. I had died this. And I was back. Brandon was already heading for the bourbon bottle, his movements jerky with a frantic energy I now recognized. The script was the same. But I was not. As the party thinned and the sky turned that familiar orange-purple, he made his move. The duffel bag. These. The slurred declaration. "She needs me. Nora's waiting." This time I didn't block the door. I didn't beg. I simply leaned against the doorframe, a small, cold smile touching my lips. The tears, the panic, the desperate wife. That was another Maya. A dead Maya. "Go," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Go to her." Surprise flickered in his glazed eyes, quickly replaced by a drunken, triumphant glee. He stumbled toward the driveway. I didn't watch him leave. I turned and walked to the center of the yard where my best friend Kendra was talking with my parents. Kendra, a divorce attorney with a mind like a steel trap and a heart fiercely loyal, took one look at my face and excused herself from the conversation. "Kendra," I said, the word a bullet. "I need a divorce. Tonight." The music from the speaker seemed to fade. My mom's hand flew to her mouth. "What happened?" Kendra asked. "All business. Nora Finch is divorced. He's driving to her, drunk. He said she's worth more than all of this." My voice didn't waver. "I believe him." Kendra's eyes narrowed. We move fast. Do you have your in-laws' number?" I nodded, already pulling out my phone. I typed a message to Frank and Susan Davis. "Emergency. Please come to the house now. Brandon has left." "Good," Kendra said. "We have maybe a 2-hour window before the alcohol wears off enough for second thoughts, or before he actually gets to her and reality sets in. We need to use his impulsiveness against him." As my parents, their faces etched with shock and fury, began quietly ushering guests out, Kendra sat at our patio table, her laptop open. "We need 2 documents. A divorce settlement agreement so skewed it's laughable, and a share transfer for the business. He's emotional, drunk, and desperate to prove a point. He might just be arrogant enough to sign." Davis and Davis Creative was our small graphic design firm, started with money from my inheritance. It was profitable, the bedrock of our financial stability. The house was in my name, bought with the same inheritance. In his current state, would he even remember? "He'll sign anything that looks like a ticket out," I whispered, the plan forming in the ice-clear space where my heart used to be. "He'll want to show me how little it all means." An hour later, the backyard was empty, littered with the ghosts of the party. Nora slept in her crib, oblivious. Frank and Susan arrived, bewildered and anxious. I relayed the events in a flat, unemotional monotone. "He chose her," I finished, looking at Frank. Explicitly. He said she was worth more than his family. Susan burst into tears, making excuses about stress, the shock, the bourbon. Frank just looked old and tired. Where is he now? As if on cue, headlights swept the driveway. Not Brandon's truck. A county sheriff's SUV. 2 deputies helped a staggering green-gilled Brandon up the walk. DUI, they explained. He'd been pulled over for swerving just 20 miles north. Given a break due to his clean record and cooperative demeanor, they'd driven him home. His truck was impounded. They left him in the foyer, a crumpled, reeking mess of self-pity. When the door closed, he pushed himself upright against the wall. His eyes found me. Maya. God, I'm so sorry, he slurred, the apology as hollow as a drum. His gaze darted past me, searching. I need the keys to your car. I have to go. The audacity was breathtaking. You're not driving. You could have killed someone. He lurched forward, his movements clumsy and aggressive. Give me the goddamn keys. She needs me. Don't you get it? She's all alone. His voice cracked with performative anguish. This was the moment. I let the dam break. Tears I didn't feel welled in my eyes, my breath hitched in practiced sobs. Then what am I? I cried, the performance feeling both grotesque and brilliantly strategic. What was our marriage? Did you ever love me at all? He faltered, the script disrupted. His alcohol-sodden brain short-circuited. Don't ask me that. I don't know. He fumbled for his phone, shoving the cracked screen at me. Look. This is what matters. Nora Finch's Instagram. A new post. A photo of a single wilted sunflower in a cracked vase, captioned, "Everything beautiful eventually breaks. Left with just the dust of memories. Is there anyone out there who remembers how to put things back together?" I made a small, wounded animal sound as if the pixels had physically hurt me. Inside, I was coldly memorizing every word. Evidence. So Nora and I, we're just dust to you? I whispered, laying the final stone in the path I was building for him. Aya, please. Just let me go. I walked to the dining table where Kendra had laid the documents. I picked them up along with a pen. My hand trembled authentically now. Not with fear but with the sheer, terrifying momentum of what I was doing. Then sign this, I said, my voice trembling. The house, my car, the company, Nora, the savings, it all stays with me. You walk away with nothing but your freedom to be with her. Sign it and the door is open. He stared at the papers, a blur of text. He didn't read a word. He didn't ask questions. He saw only the obstacle dissolving. A look of furious relief contorted his face. He snatched the pen. Fine. Whatever. Just give me the keys. He scrawled his name on the 2 signature lines Kendra had flagged, pressed his thumb onto a notary stamp she provided. He threw the papers at me. They fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. Happy, he spat. He shoved past me, grabbed my car keys from the bowl and stumbled back out into the night. The sound of my sedan peeling away was the sound of a life ripping in two. I bent and picked up the papers. Kendra was beside me. I'll file the share transfer electronically the second the office opens. The divorce petition is ready, she said, her voice low and urgent. But the night isn't over. He's still drunk, still emotional, and now he's in a different car. You need to call his parents back down here. Now. Frank and Susan, who had been hovering in the kitchen doorway, stared in horrified silence. They had just watched their son sign away his future in a drunken rage. He'll crash, Frank said, his voice hollow with certainty. He's in no state to drive. Susan let out a choked sob. We have to stop him. But it was too late. He was gone, chasing a ghost down a dark highway, propelled by bourbon and a decade-old fantasy. And I was left holding the cold, hard proof of his abandonment. The game had begun. And for the first time I was holding the cards. The silence after Brandon left was a living thing, thick and heavy in the house. Frank Davis sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. Susan wept quietly, a continuous, helpless sound. Kendra moved to the kitchen, making coffee nobody would drink, her phone already pressed to her ear as she spoke in low, rapid tones to her paralegal. I stood in the center of the living room, the signed agreements cold in my hands. The adrenaline that had fueled my performance was receding, leaving a strange, hollow calm in its wake. Nora began to fuss softly on the baby monitor. The normalcy of the sound was an anchor. "I need to feed her," I said, my voice sounding detached even to myself. In the nursery's soft glow as Nora nursed, the reality of the situation settled onto my shoulders. I had my daughter. I had a signed document giving me everything. And my husband was somewhere on the I-5, drunk and desperate, a danger to himself and everyone on the road. The vengeful part of me, the part forged in the memory of a fall that hadn't happened here, wanted to let fate take him. The mother in me, the human, felt a sickening lurch of dread. I returned to the living room. Kendra was off the phone. "The share transfer is prepped for filing at 8 a.m. The divorce petition is ready to go. But we have a more immediate problem." She looked at Frank and Susan. "He is an imminent hazard. We have a moral and legal obligation to try to stop him." Frank nodded, grim. "We've been calling. He goes straight to voicemail. He's turned it off." "Then we call the highway patrol," Kendra said. "Report a drunk driver. Give them the make, model and plate of Maya's car." She did it herself, her voice crisp and professional as she spoke to the dispatcher. But we all knew the odds were slim. The waiting was an exquisite torture. Susan's prayers were a whispered mantra. Frank paced, a caged animal. Kendra worked, a bastion of efficiency. I sat, staring at the dark window, seeing not my reflection but the phantom memory of concrete stairs rushing up to meet me, my body curled around a tiny, fragile form. The pain had been real. The terror had been real. It was a scar on my soul from a wound inflicted in another lifetime. An hour crept by. Then Frank's phone, clutched in his white-knuckled hand, rang with an unfamiliar number. He fumbled to answer, putting it on speaker. A chaos of wind noise and static, then Brandon's voice, thick and slurred but weirdly clear. "Dad? Is that you? Brandon? Where are you? Pull over." Frank barked. "On the 5, gonna get her. Told you, you never liked her." The connection crackled. "Brandon, listen to me." Susan screamed into the phone. "Stop the car. Please, baby, just pull over at the next rest stop. We'll come get you." "She needs me." His voice faded, then came back stronger, charged with a drunken, self-righteous anger. "You made me give her up. You and your practical advice. Well, not this time. This time I'm choosing." The sound that cut him off was not of this world. The call cut off suddenly. Silence. Susan's shriek was a raw animal thing. "Brandon. No." Frank shouted into the void. "Brandon. Can you hear me? Son." Nothing. The line died. The room plunged into a frozen, surreal horror. Susan collapsed, her wails muffled against Frank's shirt. He held her, his own face a mask of ashen shock. I felt my knees go weak. I grabbed the back of a chair. This was real. This was happening now. My plan, my cold strategy, was suddenly washed in the bright, terrible light of potential tragedy. Kendra's phone buzzed. She listened, her face a professional blank slate. She hung up and turned to us. "That was a contact at CHP. There's been a major single-vehicle accident north of Coalinga. Vehicle matches the description. Driver was extracted alive but is critical. Airlifted to Central Valley General." The details that followed were clinical and grim. He'd lost control of the vehicle on the highway. The crash was severe. Emergency crews worked for a long time to extract him, and the injuries were life-threatening. In the trauma bay, to save his life, doctors were forced to perform an emergency surgery that permanently changed his mobility. Frank and Susan were transformed. Their anger, their disappointment, their confusion, all evaporated in the nuclear blast of parental terror. They were a united front of grief, gathering purses and jackets, speaking in frantic shorthand phrases about the fastest route. I felt suspended outside of myself. The man who had threatened my child, who had shoved me in another life, was now maimed, broken. I searched for pity and found only a vast, numb relief that he was alive, not for his sake, but because his death would have been a complicated, messy ending I wasn't ready to face. And beneath that, a sharp, dark sliver of thought. Nora Finch's carefully staged performance of Distress Tomorrow would be playing to an empty house. Kendra touched my elbow, guiding me into the kitchen. "You don't have to go tonight," she said quietly. "You're postpartum. I'm in shock. It's a valid medical reason. You need to be with Nora." She was giving me an escape hatch, time to think. I nodded. Tell them I'll come in the morning. I need to process everything." As Frank and Susan hurried out into the night, a united front of devastation, I locked the door. I leaned against it, the silence of the house now a screaming void. Kendra stayed. The transfer will be filed at 8:01 a.m., she reiterated. But this changes the landscape, Maya. A lot. A severely injured, newly disabled man is a sympathetic figure. The courts are lenient. His parents will rally around him now, not just as their son but as a victim. They will absolutely pressure him to contest those agreements, to claim duress, undue influence, that he wasn't in his right mind. He signed them to get to another woman, I said, my voice flat. His injury doesn't change his intent. I know. But it clouds the picture. We need to be smarter. We need to control the narrative completely. She paused, choosing her words. And we need to think about Nora. A penniless, amputee ex-boyfriend fresh from a scandalous divorce might not be the romantic rescue she has in mind. A cold understanding dawned. The accident wasn't an end. It was a pivot. The battlefield had just been radically altered. Brandon was no longer just a villain. He was a tragic, broken figure. And I couldn't be seen as the heartless witch kicking him while he was down. I looked at Kendra, the strategy beginning to reform in my mind. Then we don't let her find out from him, I said slowly. We control that story too. Kendra gave a slow, approving nod. Exactly. You should get some rest. Tomorrow you need to play the part of the devastated but strong, loyal wife. It's the only way to maintain the moral high ground. Upstairs I checked on Nora. In the quiet dark, the full weight of the night descended. I had wanted him to suffer consequences, but this was a raw, mangled reality I hadn't envisioned. The ghost of the fall from the stairs seemed to whisper in the shadows. You wanted him to feel loss. Now he has. But it wasn't enough. He had to understand the loss. He had to choke on it. And for that he needed to be conscious. He needed to see what his choices had truly cost him. The accident had changed the game, but my objective remained the same. I just had to be more careful, more cunning than ever. The morning sun felt accusatory as I drove the 2 hours to Central Valley General. I'd left Nora with my mother, whose face was a storm of worry and unasked questions. I wore simple jeans and a soft sweater, no makeup, my hair pulled back. I needed to look like what I was supposed to be. A wife in shock, clinging to duty. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and despair. Frank and Susan were crumpled in the ICU waiting room chairs, aging a decade overnight. Susan's eyes were swollen slits. Frank's gaze was fixed on a dirty floor tile. They looked up as I approached, and I saw the flicker. The hope that I, the spouse, would bring order, and the resentment that I was walking in whole while their son was in pieces. "Hiya," Susan whispered, standing to embrace me. Her hug was desperate, searching for comfort I couldn't genuinely give. He's awake. They moved him to a room. It's bad. How is he? I asked, my voice appropriately thin. Frank cleared his throat, the sound like gravel. The leg's gone. Above the knee. He doesn't really understand yet. The drugs. He's asking for his phone, Susan interjected, a fresh tear tracing a path through her powder. All he cares about is that damn phone. To call her. I nodded, a perfect portrait of pained understanding. I'll go see him. The walk to his private room was long. Through the doorway, Brandon looked small and pale against the stark white sheets, a bundle of bandages and tubes. His eyes were closed. For a fleeting second I saw the man I'd married, the sharp line of his jaw, the familiar curve of his brow, and a shard of something like grief pricked me. Then his eyes opened. They were clouded with opioids and trauma, but they focused on me with a shocking, urgent clarity. Not love. Not remorse. Need. My phone, he rasped, his voice dry and cracked. Where's my phone? It was destroyed in the crash, Brandon, I said softly, moving to stand by the bed. I didn't touch him. He began to thrash, a weak, panicked movement. The heart monitor beeped a frantic warning. I need it. I have to call her. I have to tell her what happened. She'll think I abandoned her. Tell who, honey? Susan asked from the doorway, her voice trembling with a hope that he'd say my name. Nora. The name was a sob, a prayer, a curse. She's waiting. He posted, she's hurting. I promised. He tried to sit up, his face contorting in agony as the motion jolted his amputated leg. A guttural cry tore from his throat, part pain, part utter frustration. A nurse bustled in, her expression professionally calm. "Mr. Davis, you need to lie still. You'll tear your stitches." She adjusted his fore, adding a dose of something to the line. "Your family is here. Focus on them." "They're not who I need," he cried, the drugs and despair loosening his tongue. His eyes, glazing over again, found mine. "Wyatt, get me a phone. Please. I need to hear her voice." This was my cue. The loyal, wounded wife. I let my eyes well up, my lip quiver. I reached out and took his hand, the first time I'd touched him since before the party. His skin was cool and clammy. "Shoo," I whispered, the picture of agonized compassion. "Just rest. I'll try to get a message to her, okay? I'll let her know you're all right." The lie was smooth as silk. He stared at me, confusion and desperation warring in his hazy gaze. The promise of contact with his goddess was a lifeline. He stopped struggling. "You will." "I'll try," I repeated, squeezing his hand gently before letting go, the contact making my skin crawl. "But you have to rest. For your parents. For Nora." The mention of our daughter didn't even register. His eyelids were getting heavy. Tell her I'm coming." Just delayed. He was asleep before I left the room. In the hallway, Frank's face was a thundercloud. Susan looked devastated. "He's not in his right mind," she pleaded to me, to the universe. "The painkillers, the trauma." "I know," I said, injecting a world of weary sadness into my voice. "But his mind is fixed on her. Maybe if she knew the truth, knew how badly he was hurt, she'd come. It might give him something to fight for." I was carefully planting the idea, making myself seem like the selfless partner prioritizing his mental recovery over my own shattered heart. Frank grunted, a sound of pure disgust. "That woman is poison." I spent the afternoon in a horrible pantomime. I fetched water for Susan, spoke in low tones with doctors, and sat for long periods staring blankly at the wall, the epitome of shell-shocked devotion. Inside, my mind was racing. During a coffee run, I found a quiet corner and pulled out the new, prepaid phone I'd bought that morning. I logged into a blank social media account I'd created years ago and never used. Then I found Nora Finch's profile. It was exactly as I'd expected. A curated gallery of melancholy beauty. Soft focus selfies, pictures of abstract sculptures, quotes about heartbreak and art. A dramatic, symbolic image paired with words meant to provoke concern and urgency, captioned, "Sometimes the most beautiful repairs leave the deepest scars. Who's brave enough to try?" It was so transparent it was almost funny. The calculated vulnerability, the damsel in distress signal aimed at a specific susceptible audience. My audience, currently unconscious in room 412. But she wasn't the only one who could use narrative. I took a deep breath and opened the alumni group chat for Brandon's college. It was a dormant feed of occasional job postings and baby announcements. I typed a message, my fingers steady. "Hi everyone. This is Maya Davis, Brandon's wife. I'm sorry to intrude on this space, but I'm desperate and don't know who else to turn to. Many of you knew Brandon and Nora Finch years ago. Last night, after hearing about Nora's divorce, Brandon left our daughter's 1-month celebration in a very emotional state. He was in a terrible car accident on the I-5. I attached the most graphic of the crash scene photos the CHP had sent Frank. The crumpled carcass of my sedan, the torn guardrail. Then I added a screenshot of Nora's post from last night, the one with the wilted sunflower and the caption about dust and memories. "He's at Central Valley General. He's lost his right leg. He's alive, but his spirit is broken. All he keeps asking for is Nora, worried she thinks he abandoned her. I don't know how to reach her or if I even should. I just know that the man I love is hurting in ways I can't fix and his heart is somewhere else. If anyone has any advice or knows how I could contact Nora to just let her know he's okay, please. I'm at a loss." I hit send. The effect was instantaneous. The dormant chat exploded. Dozens of messages poured in. "Oh my God, Maya, I'm so sorry. This is heartbreaking. Nora always did have a hold on him. Is there a fundraiser? I think Nora's sister is on Facebook. He drove all that way for her. After all this time." I watched the notifications bloom, a toxic flower of gossip and sympathy. I'd done it. I'd framed the story perfectly. Brandon, the tragically loyal fool, crippled for a love that was never his. Nora, the oblivious muse. And me, the devoted, helpless wife. putting his desperate yearning above my own dignity. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive publicity. Within an hour, a private message popped up from an account I recognized. James Tran, Brandon's former friend and current business rival. Their falling out had been over a major client Brandon had poached years ago. James's message was succinct. James Tran. Just saw your post. That's brutal. Listen, I might have some info about Nora's situation. Not pretty. Could be useful for you. Call me if you want. He left a number. My pulse quickened. An inside source. I saved the number. By the time I returned to the room, Brandon was awake again, more coherent but sinking into a bleak, restless depression. The reality of the bandaged stump was beginning to permeate the drug haze. It's gone, he muttered to the ceiling, not to any of us. It's really gone. You're alive, son, Frank said, his voice thick. That's what matters. Brandon turned his head, his eyes blazing with a sudden, pathetic fury. Alive? Like this? What kind of life is this? I don't know how to live like this anymore. He pounded a fist weakly on the mattress. Susan burst into fresh tears. I stepped forward, playing my role. Brandon, don't say that. You have so much to live for. You have a second chance now. I paused, letting the silence hang. With whoever you choose. His angry gaze snapped to me. The manipulation was transparent, but he was too raw, too self-absorbed to see it. He saw only an open door where he expected a wall. Nora, he breathed. I posted in your alumni group, I said softly, as if confessing a sin. I didn't know what else to do. I told them you were hurt, that you were asking for her. I thought, maybe someone could get a message to her. His expression shifted from anger to stunned, desperate hope. You did? What did they say? Is she coming? I don't know yet, I said, injecting a perfect note of wounded resignation into my voice. But people know now. She'll know. In that moment I was his savior. The woman granting his heart's desire, even as he obliterated mine. Frank and Susan watched, bewildered and hurt, but also strangely grateful that I had found a way to calm the storm. My new phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. It's James. Nora's not what you think. She's playing him. And her soon-to-be ex is a piece of work. I have a proposal for you. About Davis and Davis. I looked at Brandon, who was now staring at the doorway as if expecting Nora to materialize there, a vision in black lace and sympathy. He was in a prison of his own making, and I had just handed him the key, knowing the lock was rusted shut on the other side. The performance was working. The narrative was mine. And the next act was about to begin. The text from James Tran glowed on my screen, a lifeline thrown from an unexpected quarter. I excused myself from the hospital room, murmuring something about needing air, and found a deserted stairwell where the smell of stale cigarettes clung to the concrete. I dialed the number. He answered on the second ring. Why? I figured you'd call. His voice was smooth, confident, devoid of the performative pity flooding the alumni chat. James, you said you had information. A low, dry chuckle. Straight to it. I like that. Here's the unvarnished truth. Nora Finch is a climber. He always was. She left Brandon for my cousin Leo because Leo owned a gallery and a trust fund. It was never about art. It was about a landing pad. I leaned against the cold wall, the pieces clicking. And the divorce? Leo caught her. Not with another man, but with his money. She's been funneling his cash to her deadbeat brother's startup for 2 years. A classic golden goose situation. Leo had a prenup tighter than a drum. She gets nothing. Less than nothing she might owe him. The lost everything sob story is technically true, but it's lost everything she took. Now she's scrambling. The posts? They're Hail Mary passes. One for Leo, one for any nostalgic backup plan. He paused. Brandon, unfortunately, is the backup plan. The confirmation was both satisfying and infuriating. So she's fishing. And Brandon took the bait, hook, line, and his right leg. Precisely. He was always her reliable fallback. A little needy, a lot obsessed, but stable. Or he was. James's tone shifted, becoming businesslike. Which brings me to my proposal. I heard through the grapevine about the restructuring at Davis and Davis. My guard went up. What did you hear? That Brandon signed over his shares. In the middle of a personal crisis. A judge might look poorly on that. It could get messy, tied up in court for years, draining the company's value. He signed it willingly, I said, my voice harder than I intended. I believe you. But, willingly, after a traumatic shock while intoxicated and before a life-altering accident? A good lawyer, not yours obviously, could paint a very different picture. One of coercion. Of a wife exploiting a husband's mental crisis. The chill in the stairwell seeped into my bones. He was articulating my deepest fear, the flaw in Kendra's otherwise perfect plan. What's your point, James? My point is I want the company. You presumably want a clean break in cash. I'm offering a solution. Sell me Brandon's shares. Well, your shares now technically. I'll pay a fair market price. A real price, not the $1 fiction on that transfer. But we structure it as a fire sale, a distressed asset sale due to Brandon's incapacitation. It happens fast before the divorce is even finalized. The money goes into an account he can't touch. Once the company is mine, it's out of the marital asset pool completely. It becomes a done deal, far harder for him to contest later. It was brilliant. And dangerous. Why would you do this? You hate Brandon. Business isn't personal. Davis & Davis has client lists and IP I want. This is the cheapest, fastest way to get them. And, his voice dropped, a note of genuine cold amusement entering it. Personally, I find the idea of owning the company Brandon threw away for a woman who sees him as an ATM with a crush, deeply poetic. Consider it my contribution to karmic balance. I was silent, processing the ruthless elegance of it. He was offering me a shield and a sword. The cash would secure Nora's future. Removing the company from the equation would simplify the divorce beyond measure. And it would be the ultimate humiliation for Brandon, to wake up and find his livelihood, the professional identity he'd prized, owned by his nemesis. How do I know I can trust you? I asked. You don't. But you can trust my self-interest. A protracted legal battle devalues the asset I want. A clean, quick sale serves me. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers. You have your lawyer review them. We can do the transfer in days. I'll need to discuss it with my attorney. Naturally. Tell Kendra I said hello. He's good. We've crossed paths before. He hung up. I stood in the stairwell, my heart pounding. This changed everything. It was a risk aligning with James Tran. But the alternative, a years-long war over the company with a newly sympathetic, disabled Brandon backed by his desperate parents, was a nightmare. When I returned to the room, the atmosphere had shifted again. Brandon was asleep, but Susan was on her phone, her face animated. She replied, she whispered, beckoning me over. Who? Nora. Someone from the group chat gave me her sister's number. I sent her a message explaining everything, how Brandon was hurt, asking for her. And Nora just wrote back. She thrust the phone at me. The message was a masterpiece of calculated concern. Susan, I'm in shock. My heart is breaking for Brandon. That beautiful, loyal man. I had no idea. I never meant for any of this. Please tell him I'm thinking of him. That I'm here. The world is so cruel to pure hearts. Nora. It was vague, non-committal, but dripping with just enough sentimental syrup to send Brandon into orbit. It was perfect. See. Susan said, a tear of vindication in her eye. She cares. This will help him. It will give him a reason. Frank grunted, unconvinced. I simply nodded. I'm glad, I said, the lie now coming as easily as breath. That evening, back at my now quiet house, I video-called Kendra. I laid out James Tran's proposal. Kendra listened, steepling her fingers. He's not wrong, she said finally. The company is the biggest vulnerability in our position. If we can convert it to liquid assets pre-divorce, it becomes a separate transaction. A sale of separate property. It's cleaner. And James Tran, for all his sharp edges, is reputable in a cutthroat way. If he signs a contract, he'll honor it. His ego is tied to being a winner, not a cheat. So you think we should do it? I think we'd be fools not to seriously consider it. Let me negotiate the terms. We'll get the price up. But the core idea is sound. It protects you. He gave me a long look. It's also a brutal power move. You understand that, right? Once Brandon finds out, and it will break him in a whole new way. I met her gaze on the screen. The memory of the balcony, his hands clutching my daughter, the rush of the fall. It flashed behind my eyes. I understand, I said, my voice quiet and steady. The next 3 days were a blur of dual performances. At the hospital, I was the steadfast wife, reading get-well cards from pitying colleagues to Brandon, who listened only for any mention of Nora. I showed him the message from her on Susan's phone. He wept, clutching the device like a holy relic. The devotion in his eyes was for a phantom. His physical therapy began, a grueling, humiliating process he endured with a sullen resentment, save for when he used it as fodder for more messages to Nora. PT was hell today. Thought of you to get through it. Meanwhile, Kendra and James Tran's lawyers worked at lightning speed. The sale price was negotiated to a sum that made my head spin. Enough to secure Nora's college and then some. The paperwork was a labyrinth of LLCs and holding companies, designed to obscure the trail just enough. The money was wired to a new, secure account in my name only. The day the transfer was finalized, James called me. It's done. Davis and Davis Creative is now a wholly owned subsidiary of Tran Digital Solutions. Effective immediately. Thank you, James. Don't thank me. It was a business transaction. He paused. For what it's worth, I am sorry about all the rest of it. You deserve better than to be someone's consolation prize. The unexpected sliver of decency caught me off guard. I'm working on it. I went to the hospital that afternoon with a new sense of detachment. The deed was done. The cage was being built around Brandon's future, and he was too busy staring at the pretty, empty bird cage Nora dangled in front of him to notice. He was in a foul mood. The drugs were lower, the pain was sharper, the reality was inescapable. She says she wants to come, he mumbled as I arranged flowers. But she's dealing with her own divorce paperwork. She says it's complicated. I'll bet it is, I thought. Aloud I said, I'm sure she'll come when she can. He looked at me, a sudden strange clarity in his eyes. You've been okay about all this, Maya. I know I don't deserve it. It was the closest to a real apology I would ever get. I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. When I'm out of here, he continued, his gaze drifting to the window, we'll need to talk about the company. The shares I signed over, we'll need to work something out. For Nora's sake. And there was the first hint of the fight to come. The grasping at the assets he'd so clearly discarded. I took a deep breath, readying my next line in this endless play. Actually, Brandon, I said, my voice gentle, almost apologetic. About the company. I had to make a decision. With you incapacitated and the legal situation, I sold it. To James Tran. It was the only way to protect its value. For Nora's future. The silence in the room was absolute. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly gray. His mouth opened but no sound came out. He looked from me to his parents and back to me as if waiting for the punchline. You what? The words were a choked whisper. I sold your company, Brandon. To James. It's done. For a second I saw it, the utter, soul-crushing comprehension. Not just of the loss but of the finality. Of the sheer, masterful defeat. He had sacrificed his leg, his marriage, his dignity for a fantasy. And while he was sleeping, I had sold the last tangible piece of the life he'd thrown away to the man he despised most in the world. A raw, wounded noise erupted from his chest, part sob, part roar. He grabbed the plastic water pitcher from his tray and hurled it against the wall, where it shattered with a satisfying crash. Get out, he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. Get the hell out of my room. Frank and Susan jumped, startled. I didn't flinch. I simply stood, the picture of calm regret in the storm of his fury. I'll go, I said softly. I'm so sorry, Brandon. I did what I thought was best for our family. As I walked out, the sound of his shattered weeping followed me down the hall. It wasn't the sound of a man crying for a lost leg or even a lost love. It was the sound of a man finally, viscerally understanding the price of his choices. And realizing he had paid with everything he had. I drove home from the hospital in a state of surreal calm. The echo of Brandon's shattered rage was a distant storm, contained within the sterile walls of room 412. The deed was done. The company was gone, the money was mine, and Brandon's final tether to his old identity, the successful co-owner of Davis and Davis, had been severed by my hand. A profound exhaustion settled into my bones, deeper than any sleepless night with a newborn. My mother met me at the door, Nora cooing in her arms. How is he? she asked, her voice laced with a complicated worry. For me, for the grandchild, even begrudgingly for the man who had hurt her daughter. He's alive, I said, the non-answer saying everything. I took Nora her solid, warm weight, an immediate antidote to the hospital's cold sickness. He found out I sold the company. Mom's eyes widened. Oh, Maya. It was necessary. I buried my nose in Nora's downy hair, inhaling her pure baby scent. It's over, Mom. The business part, at least. But it wasn't over. I knew that. Brandon's explosion was just the first tremor. The real earthquake was still coming, and its name was Nora Finch. 2 days later she arrived. I wasn't there. I'd deliberately chosen to visit Nora's pediatrician for a checkup that morning, a legitimate and necessary absence. Susan called me, her voice a frantic whisper from the hospital hallway. She's here, Maya. She just walked in. How does she look? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Like she's in a perfume ad for heartbreak, Susan hissed, her usual maternal protectiveness now fully redirected against this intruder. All black linen, messy bun, no makeup, but the kind of no makeup that takes an hour. She brought him a single stupid peony. I almost smiled. Of course she did. The aesthetic of grief. And Brandon. He's transformed. Smiling. Like a puppy. He hasn't smiled once since the accident. Her voice broke. It's killing Frank. Let it play out, Susan, I said, echoing Kendra's advice. He needs to see her in the full, unflinching light of day. Not through a phone screen. I spent the afternoon at the park with Nora, watching other families, feeling like an anthropologist observing a species to which I no longer belonged. My phone buzzed intermittently with updates from a subtly seething Susan, relayed via text. She's holding his hand. Talking about the fragility of the human form, or some nonsense. He's telling her about the accident, making it sound like some heroic journey. She hasn't asked once about Nora. The last text came as the sun was dipping low. She's leaving. Said she has a mediation session with her lawyer. Brandon looks devastated. She promised to come back tomorrow. The performance had its first intermission. I went home and called James Tran. She's made contact, I said without preamble. I heard, he replied. My cousin Leo finalized the divorce today. Signed the papers at noon. Nora got nothing but a suitcase of her own clothes and a bill for her brother's debts she'd guaranteed. She's officially a free, penniless woman. So that was the mediation session. The clock was now ticking in earnest for Nora. Her options had narrowed to one: Brandon. Or more specifically, the idea of Brandon as a provider. An idea that was about to collide with reality. The next day I went to the hospital. I timed it for the afternoon when Susan said Nora usually visited. I needed to see this for myself. I heard her before I saw her. A low, melodic laugh that sounded practiced, drifting from Brandon's room. I paused at the doorway. Nora was perched elegantly on the chair beside his bed, one hand resting on his forearm. She was indeed beautiful in a weathered, artistic way. Her clothes were simple but expensive, her sadness curated. Brandon was gazing at her as if she were the sun, his pain and amputation momentarily forgotten. Maya, Frank's voice grumbled behind me. He stood with a cup of vending machine coffee, his expression grim. Come to watch the show. Just bringing some things, I said, holding up a bag of his toiletries from home. I stepped into the room. The atmosphere shifted instantly, cooling by 10 degrees. Brandon's rapt expression tightened into defensiveness. Nora turned, and her eyes swept over me with a swift, appraising glance. I saw the calculation, the tired new mother in yoga pants, no threat. You must be Maya, she said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. She didn't stand. Brandon's told me so much about you. Thank you for taking such good care of him. The audacity stole my breath. Thank you. I was his wife. I placed the bag on the table. Just doing what anyone would, I said, my tone flat. Nora's been a lifeline, Brandon interjected, his hand covering hers. A possessive gesture. On my territory in my hospital room visit he was claiming her. I'm sure, I said. I looked directly at Nora. I heard your divorce was finalized. Congratulations. A flicker of surprise, then irritation passed behind her eyes. She hadn't expected me to be informed. It's a relief. A painful one. But it allows for new beginnings. She glanced meaningfully at Brandon. New beginnings are expensive, I said, smiling a tight, meaningless smile. Especially in the Bay Area. I hope you have a good support system. Brandon frowned. Nora's an incredibly talented artist. She'll be back on her feet in no time. Of course, I said. I turned to go. I'll leave you to it. Brandon, the nurse said they want to try you on the new prosthesis mock-up this evening. Try to focus for that, okay? His face darkened at the reminder of his grim reality, a reality Nora's presence allowed him to ignore. I'll be fine. As I walked out, I heard Nora's voice lowered to a comforting murmur. Don't let her upset you, my love. She's just bitter. The next week was a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. I played my part to perfection. The capable, slightly resentful caretaker handling insurance calls, bringing clean clothes, always intruding on their curated romantic bubble with the blunt tools of reality. Medical bills, physical therapy schedules, questions about where his disability paperwork should be sent. Nora played hers, the ethereal, understanding muse. She read him poetry. She sketched him as a wounded warrior. She talked of future trips to Big Sur, of studio spaces, of a life rebuilt together. She never offered to change a bandage. She never asked about his medication schedule. She floated above the grim details, and Brandon adored her for it. The cracks began as the money ran out. Brandon's paycheck had stopped. His personal savings were modest. He'd been living on our joint account, which I had legally separated the day after the accident. The hospital started asking about payment plans. Frank and Susan, while supportive, were on a fixed retirement income. I was there the day the financial counselor came. Nora was sketching in the corner, pretending not to listen. Given the loss of income and the significant rehabilitation costs, the counselor said gently, we strongly recommend applying for state disability and Medicaid. There are also nonprofit organizations for amputees that can help with equipment. Brandon looked mortified. I'm a business owner. I don't need charity. Actually, Mr. Davis, the counselor said, checking her file, our records show Davis and Davis Creative was sold. Your employment status is listed as terminated. The room went silent. Nora's pencil stopped scratching. Sold. Brandon whispered, though he knew. He looked at me, betrayal fresh in his eyes. It was a necessary liquidation, I said calmly to the counselor. The proceeds are being managed separately for long-term family needs. A vague, truthful statement that offered no lifeline to him. After the counselor left, the tension was a physical presence. Nora finally spoke, her voice light, probing. Sold? I didn't realize. So, what does that mean for your assets, Brandon? For our plans. Our plans. The hook was set. Brandon looked panicked. It's complicated, Nora. The money is tied up. Maya handled it. He threw me under the bus, a coward to the end. Nora's beautiful face remained placid, but I saw the sharp intelligence in her eyes reassessing. The ATM might be out of order. I see, she said softly. Well, love finds a way. We'll be frugal. Artists are good at that. But the seed of doubt was planted. Her visits became shorter, less frequent. She was networking, meeting with a gallery contact, helping a friend install a show. Brandon grew anxious, desperate. He started pressing me about the money from the sale. I share Maya. I'm entitled to half of that. I need it. Nora and I need to get a place to start our life. We were in his room alone. I looked at him, this shattered, entitled man. Your share was signed over to me, Brandon. In exchange for walking away free and clear to be with her. Remember? The money is securing Nora's future. It's not for you and Nora to play house. His face contorted with rage. You bitch. You're trying to punish me. You're keeping me trapped here, poor and broken, so she won't want me. I didn't deny it. I just looked at him. The only person who trapped you, Brandon, is in the mirror. And the only thing keeping you poor and broken is a 6-figure medical debt and the loss of the career you abandoned. The final act was precipitated by James Tran. True to his poetic sense of justice, he sent a lavish fruit basket to Brandon's hospital room. The card read, wishing you a speedy recovery. Looking forward to integrating the Davis and Davis team into Tran Digital. Best, James. It was the match to the gasoline. Brandon erupted. He called Nora, sobbing, raging about the humiliation, about my treachery, about James's gloating. According to Susan, who listened outside the door, Nora's tone on the phone changed. The melodic sympathy evaporated, replaced by a crisp, impatient clarity. Brandon, you need to get a lawyer. Today. You signed things when you were vulnerable. He can't just steal your company. Sue her. But Brandon, in his desperation, confessed the full, ugly truth. I signed it, Nora. I signed it to get to you. I gave it all up, for you. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. When Nora spoke again, her voice was cold, distant. That was incredibly foolish, Brandon. I never asked you to do that. I never asked you for anything. She came to the hospital one last time. I made sure I was there. She didn't bring a peony. She stood just inside the doorway, her suitcase at her feet. I'm leaving, Brandon. For New York. An opportunity came up. His face was a mask of utter devastation. What? Oh. Nora, we can fight this. We can be together. Be together how? She asked, her voice finally shedding its artistic veneer, revealing the hard, pragmatic core beneath. In a Medicaid-funded rehab facility? You have no job, no money, no leg. You're a lawsuit away from being a permanent dependent. What exactly are you offering? The words hung in the air, brutal and true. Brandon looked like she had physically struck his amputated limb. You said love. Love doesn't pay the rent, Brandon, she said, her words a death knell. She glanced at me, a flicker of something almost like respect in her gaze, one predator acknowledging another. Then she looked back at the broken man in the bed. You were always more in love with the idea of me than with who I actually am. And the idea doesn't need a wheelchair. She turned and walked out, her heels clicking a final dismissive rhythm down the linoleum hall. Brandon didn't make a sound. He just stared at the empty space where her ghost had been, his body utterly still. The fantasy had evaporated, not with a weepy goodbye, but with the sterile click of a suitcase latch and the cold assessment of a balance sheet. The white moonlight had gone out, leaving him in absolute, utter darkness. And in that darkness, for the first time, he was finally alone with the consequences of his choices. The silence Nora left behind was heavier than any scream. Brandon retreated into a catatonic state, staring at the wall or the ceiling for hours, barely responding to nurses, therapists, or his parents. The furious energy that had fueled his obsession was gone, burned out, leaving only cold ash. His physical therapy sessions, which he'd previously endured with grumbling reluctance for the promise of a future with Nora, now became battlegrounds of pure refusal. He wouldn't get out of bed. He'd let himself slump in the parallel bars, a dead weight. Frank and Susan were hollowed out by a new, more hopeless grief. They had lost the son they knew twice over, first to a foolish obsession, now to a profound self-pitying despair. Their glances at me were complicated cocktails of blame and a terrible, grudging understanding. I had tried to warn them. I had, in my own way, tried to stop this. I played my final hospital role, the pragmatic, weary ex-wife in waiting. I brought paperwork. I spoke with social workers about his discharge plan, which was a grim puzzle. He couldn't go home. Our home was legally mine and psychologically a war zone. Frank and Susan's condo had stairs. A rehabilitation facility was the obvious answer, but the good ones were astronomically expensive, and the state-funded ones had long waiting lists. He can come to us, Susan said one afternoon in the cafeteria, her voice trembling with a mother's desperate resolve. We'll convert the den. We'll make it work. Frank put a gnarled hand over hers. Susan, we're not young. He needs professional care. And he's not himself. He's angry. Bitter. He's our son, she insisted, her eyes pleading with me as if I had a say. As if I cared. The proceeds from the company's sale, I said carefully, stirring my cold coffee. A portion could be set aside in a trust. For his medical and living expenses. It wouldn't be an income for him. It would be managed by a trustee. I was floating Kendra's idea. A structured settlement that looked generous but was actually a cage of control. It would get Frank and Susan off the hook financially and absolve me of direct responsibility. It also meant Brandon would be living on my charity, a thought that gave me a dark, quiet satisfaction. Frank's eyes narrowed. He was a practical man. Who's the trustee? A neutral third party. A fiduciary. I wouldn't give them an inch. He sighed, a sound of defeat. It's more than he deserves, Maya. That was the closest I'd get to an apology from him. While they wrestled with that, I focused on the legal endgame. The waiting period for our divorce was almost up. The final hurdle was the divorce registration itself. Both parties had to confirm the split after the mandatory cooling-off period. With Brandon's current state, I was terrified he'd refuse to sign, out of spite or apathy, plunging us into a contested divorce anyway. Kendra was proactive. We need to force the issue. Before he gets lawyered up by his parents out of pity. We'll go to him. Make it easy. Bring the papers to the hospital. He'll never sign them in front of me, I said. He might, she replied, a shrewd look in her eye. If the alternative is worse. If he thinks signing them is the key to making you disappear forever. The day we chose was the day Brandon was being discharged. Not to a home, but to a temporary, grim-looking rehab facility in Modesto that had a bed coilable. He was being wheeled out of his room, a sullen, blank-faced figure in sweatpants with one leg pinned up, when Kendra and I intercepted the procession in the hallway. He looked at me and for a fleeting second I saw a spark of the old hot hatred. Good. Hatred was better than nothing. Brandon, Kendra said, her voice professional and firm, cutting through the awkward silence. We need a moment. It's about finalizing the divorce. It will take 5 minutes. Frank stepped forward. Is this necessary right now? Can't it wait? Every day it waits, Kendra said not unkindly, is another day of legal limbo. For him, for Maya, for Nora. A clean break is in everyone's best interest. Even his. She looked at Brandon. You want to move on, don't you? This is the last piece of paperwork tying you to your old life. It was a brilliant pitch. Selling him his own freedom again. This time freedom from me. Brandon's eyes flickered from Kendra's face to mine. What do you want? He asked me, his voice a dull rasp. I want you to sign the final dissolution papers. So we can both be done. You can focus on your recovery. I can focus on our daughter. He flinched at our daughter, as he always did. It was a reminder of a responsibility he had abdicated. The social worker pushing his wheelchair looked intensely uncomfortable. Fine, he muttered. Give it to me. Kendra produced a clipboard with the final declaration. It wasn't the settlement agreement. That was already filed. This was just the button that ended the marriage. He scrawled his name without reading it, his hand shaking slightly. He handed the clipboard back as if it were contaminated. Happy, he spat at me. No, I said honestly, holding his gaze. But I will be. They wheeled him away, down the long hall toward the exit, toward a future of beige walls and communal therapy rooms. Frank and Susan trailed behind, two shadows of the people they'd been a month ago. I didn't watch them go. In the hospital lobby, Kendra handed me the paper. It's done. I'll file this today. You are officially, in the eyes of the state, a single woman. The expected wave of relief was muted, mixed with a strange, hollow ache. The battle was over. I had won. I had the house, the money, full custody, my freedom. I had dismantled the life we'd built and sold the pieces for scrap. I had watched him break himself for a lie and then broken him again with the truth. It was everything I'd wanted since that moment on the stairs in another life. So why did I feel so empty? The emptiness followed me home. It lingered in the 2 quiet rooms of the house I'd soon put on the market. It whispered as I rocked Nora to sleep. I had been a wife, then an avenger, a strategist, an actress. Now I was just a mother. Alone. The singularity of my purpose had vanished, leaving a vacuum. A week after the divorce was finalized, James Tran called. I hear congratulations are in order, he said. On the divorce. It feels more like a parole hearing. Fair enough. He paused. I also hear our mutual friend is settling into his new government-funded digs. A far cry from Nora's imagined artist loft in Big Sur. Yes. The reason I'm calling, he continued, his tone shifting to pure business, is that the Davis and Davis integration is complete. It went smoothly. Your former employees are all retained. I'd like to take you to dinner. To discuss a proposal. I was instantly wary. What kind of proposal? A business proposal, Maya. Relax. You're a stakeholder in my company now in a roundabout way. And you've just demonstrated a remarkable capacity for strategic thinking under extreme pressure. That's an asset. Let's talk. Tomorrow 7 p.m. at the Grove. My treat. He hung up before I could refuse. The Grove was an upscale, quiet restaurant in Palo Alto, all dark wood and soft lighting. James was already seated, looking effortlessly powerful in a charcoal sweater. He stood as I approached. "Why, you look well." "I look tired," I corrected, sitting down. "But thank you." We ordered. He made small talk, asking about Nora, about my plans for the house. He was surprisingly easy to talk to, his sharp edges sheathed in a layer of casual charm. He didn't mention Brandon once. After the main course, he leaned forward. "The proposal. I'm launching a new consultancy division at Tran Digital, focused on brand crisis management and strategic communications for high-net-worth individuals. Mostly athletes, tech founders, the occasional scandal-plagued heir." I sipped my water. And I want you to run it." I almost choked. "Me? I'm a graphic designer. Me, a housewife. You are a woman who, in the span of a month, managed a media-perfect personal crisis, controlled a destructive narrative, executed a complex asset transfer under duress, and emerged with full custody, primary assets, and public sympathy. You outmaneuvered a manipulative rival and a self-destructive spouse while postpartum. That's not a housewife. That's a goddamn field marshal." He smiled, a genuine, appreciative smile. "The clients I'm targeting? They need someone who understands pressure, optics, and ruthless efficiency. Someone with a spine of titanium. That's you." I was speechless. The idea was insane, preposterous, and thrilling. "I have a baby," I said weakly. "We have on-site childcare at the office. Flexible hours. You build the team. You set the strategy. Name your salary." He was serious. He saw in me not a victim but a veteran of a war he understood. He was offering me a new identity, one forged in the fire of my own hell. "Why would you do this?" I asked, searching his face for a trick. His expression softened just a fraction. "Because someone once told me I was nothing but my father's shadow and my own bitterness. Took me years to build something that was mine. I see you in the wreckage of something that was supposed to be yours. You have a chance to build something better from the ground up. I'm just offering the tools." He paused. "And frankly, having the ex-wife of the man whose company I now own running a prestigious division for me? It's a delicious bit of brand storytelling. We're both pragmatists, Maya. We can admit that." I laughed, a real, unexpected laugh that felt strange in my throat. He was right. It was delicious. It was also a ladder out of the emptiness. "I'll need to think about it," I said. "Of course. Take a week." I drove home that night feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. A flicker of forward momentum of a future that was mine to design, not just salvage. That future, however, still had threads leading back to the past. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. A text. "Maya. It's Brandon. I need to see you. Please." The emptiness inside me solidified back into cold dread. I showed the text to Kendra. "Don't go alone," she advised. "Meet him in public. And record everything." I agreed to meet him at a neutral, busy Starbucks near his rehab facility. He arrived in an access van, maneuvering himself out of a wheelchair and into a booth with a clumsy, painful-looking effort. He was gaunt, his eyes sunken. The physical therapist had shaved his head for some reason, making him look even more vulnerable, more alien. He didn't get a coffee. Just sat staring at his hands. "Why am I here, Brandon?" asked my voice calm. He looked up and his eyes were pools of a misery so deep it was startling. "I've been thinking. About everything. About her. About you." He took a shaky breath. "I was blind, Maya. Blind and stupid. She played me. She was using me." I said nothing. The truth coming from him held no power. "But you were real. What we had was real. I couldn't see it. I threw it away for a fantasy." A tear tracked down his cheek. "Looked real. Probably was. I lost my leg. I lost my company. I lost you. I lost my daughter. I have nothing left." He was pleading for something. Absolution, pity, a scrap of the life he'd incinerated. "You made your choices, Brandon," I said, my voice even. "Every single one of them." "I know," he cried, then lowered his voice as people glanced over. "I know. And I'll live with that. For the rest of my life. But before I try to figure out how to live it, I needed to tell you. I'm sorry. For all of it. For the party. For the things I said. For not being the man you deserved. It was the full, unvarnished apology. The one I'd once craved. It landed on me like a stone, creating no ripple. The time for his apologies had passed. They were worthless currency. "Thank you for saying that," I said, the polite, distant phrase of a stranger. He nodded, swallowing hard, expecting more. When I offered nothing, the despair in his eyes deepened. Is there any chance? Any chance at all that someday, for Nora's sake?" "No," I cut him off, the word final as a slamming door. "There is no chance. You will see Nora when and how the court-approved supervised visitation plan allows. That is the extent of our relationship. That is the consequence." He looked down, defeated. The meeting was over. As I stood to leave, he spoke once more, so softly I almost missed it. "I loved you, you know. In my own messed-up way. I just loved the idea of her more." I stopped, turned, and looked at this broken man who had once held my child over a balcony railing in another world. "That," I said quietly, "is the saddest part of all." I walked out into the sunlight, leaving him in the gloom of the coffee shop. His apology changed nothing. But it did finally close a door. The ghost of the man I'd married had spoken its last words. I got into my car, took a deep breath, and pulled out my phone. I dialed James Tran. "James? It's Maya. About that proposal. I'm in." As I drove away, I didn't look back. The aftermath was over. The rebuilding had begun. Accepting James Tran's offer felt less like starting a new job and more like enlisting in a foreign legion. The headquarters of Tran Digital was a sleek, glass fortress in Mountain View, humming with a quiet, expensive energy. On my first day, I wore a sharp blazer that felt like armor. The on-site childcare center was a sun-drenched, beautifully equipped oasis. Leaving Nora there, her tiny hand gripping a soft toy, was its own kind of agony, but the caregivers were professionals, and her wide eyes were more curious than fearful. It was a different world. My division, tentatively named Continuum Strategic, didn't exist yet. I had an office with a view of the Santa Cruz Mountains, a budget, and a mandate. James gave me a dossier on our first potential client, a venture capitalist whose sexting scandal with a junior analyst was about to hit the press. My task: draft a containment strategy. It was shockingly similar to what I'd just lived. Control the narrative. Identify the vulnerable points. Offer a sacrifice, a donation to a women in tech charity, a temporary leave of absence. Protect the core asset, the VC's fund. I worked for 12 hours straight, fueled by a cold, focused rage that had nowhere else to go. When I presented it to James, he scanned the document, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You're natural. It's brutal. It's perfect." The emptiness began to fill, not with warmth but with purpose. I hired a small team, a razor-sharp former journalist named Anya, and a data privacy wizard who went only by Rook. We became a ghost squad, cleaning up the messes of the wealthy and powerful. With each crisis managed, each scandal muted, I felt a piece of my own trauma being metabolized, turned into professional fuel. I was good at this. I was, in a twisted way, happy. But the past wasn't a closed ledger. It was a dormant account, accruing interest. The statements came via Frank Davis. He'd call every few weeks, his voice heavy with a duty he never asked for. Brandon had been moved from the state rehab facility to a supported living apartment, a euphemism for a depressing studio with a part-time aide. He was on a cocktail of antidepressants and painkillers. He'd gotten a prosthetic leg but often refused to wear it. He spent his days watching TV or, according to Frank, scrolling obsessively through Nora Finch's social media, which had pivoted to a new, triumphant phase. She was in New York, collaborating with a married textile artist. Her posts were full of reclaimed wood and cryptic quotes about rebirth. "He's eating himself alive," Frank said during one call, a blunt, sad confession. "The money from the trust pays for the apartment and the aid. There's nothing left for a life. He asks about Nora. He can file a request for supervised visitation through the court-appointed coordinator," I replied, my tone the same one I used with clients. "Neutral. Impenetrable. The process is outlined in the custody agreement." Frank would sigh, a sound of immense weariness, and change the subject. I thought that was the pattern our lives would follow. A slow, gray decline for him, a sharp, ascendant climb for me. I was wrong. The reckoning began on a Tuesday. I was in a strategy session with a biotech CEO when my phone buzzed with a series of texts from an unknown number. Then another. And another. I excused myself and stepped into the hall. The first was a photo of Nora and me at the park, taken from a distance. The second was of my house. The third was a screenshot of a website for a local support group for parents wronged in divorce. The fourth was text: "You took everything. You think you won? You just left me with nothing to lose." My blood turned to ice. It was Brandon. But a different Brandon. This wasn't the pathetic, weeping figure from the coffee shop. This was something darker, focused. I called Kendra immediately. "He's escalating." He was all business. "Save everything. Do not respond. I'll file for a restraining order today. We'll amend it to include Nora and cite the threatening nature of the texts. The photos are stalkerish, enough for a judge to take notice." "But he hasn't done anything," I said, hearing the fear in my own voice. "He's telegraphing his intent. That's enough. Do you feel safe going home?" I looked out the glass wall at my team, at the pristine, orderly world I'd built. "No. Go to a hotel. Use an assumed name. I'll handle the police report." That night, in a bland hotel room with Nora sleeping in a crib provided by the concierge, the full weight of it crashed down. I had thought winning meant safety. But I had created a desperate, broken man with nothing but time and bitterness. In trying to punish him, I might have made him dangerous. The restraining order was granted the next day, a temporary one, pending a hearing. It prohibited Brandon from coming within 500 yards of me, my home, my workplace, or Nora's daycare. It was a piece of paper. The text stopped. For 3 days there was only silence. I moved back home, installed a new security system, and hired a burly former Marine named Hector to drive Nora and me to and from work. Paranoia became my new normal. James Tran noticed. He called me into his office. "Trouble. My ex is making threats," I said, succinct. He didn't offer platitudes. He leaned back in his chair. "You know, in business and in life, the best defense is a good offense. But sometimes, the best offense is making sure your opponent has no ammunition left to fire." "What are you suggesting?" "Just thinking out loud." He swiveled to look out his window. "A man like that in that state, he's a loose cannon. Unpredictable. The system is designed to react, not to prevent." A cold understanding dawned. James wasn't just talking about legal maneuvers. He was talking about a permanent solution. And he was letting me know he had the means to facilitate one. The offer hung in the air, sinister and tempting. "I'll handle it through the legal system," I said, my voice firm. He simply nodded. "As you wish. But the offer stands. Continuum is doing excellent work. I'd hate to see it derailed." It was a reminder. I was an asset he wanted to protect, and he had his own methods. The hearing for the permanent restraining order was set for a Friday. 2 days before my phone rang. It was the manager of Brandon's supported living complex. "Miss Davis, I'm sorry to bother you. It's about your ex-husband. There's been an incident. He had a visitor today. A woman. There was an argument. A physical altercation. The police were called." My heart stalled. "A woman? Who? A Nora Finch? She's listed on his old emergency contact forms. She was in the area," she said. "Wanted to check in." Of course. The ghost returns. "Was he hurt?" "A few bruises. She's fine. But he's not well, Miss Davis." After she left, he became hysterical. He said he was emotionally overwhelmed and said he felt completely hopeless about the future. "We've placed him on a 72-hour psychiatric hold for evaluation. We felt you should know." I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. Nora's reappearance was the catalyst. She had come, seen the ruin she'd helped create, and doubtless left with a dismissive remark that severed his last thread. I had wanted him to see the truth. I hadn't wanted him to shatter completely on the edge of that truth. Kendra was adamant. "The hearing is still on. His mental state is even more relevant. A judge will see him as unstable, a clear threat. We'll get the permanent order." The morning of the hearing, I dressed in a severe navy blue suit. Kendra met me at the courthouse. "He's here," she said quietly. "With a public defender. And his parents." We entered the courtroom. Brandon sat at the defendant's table, slumped in his wheelchair. He was wearing his prosthetic, but it looked awkward, wrong. He was staring at the wood grain of the table. Frank and Susan sat directly behind him, looking ancient. The judge, a severe woman with silver hair, called the case. My attorney presented the evidence. The texts, the photos, the police report from the altercation with Nora, the current psychiatric hold. He painted a picture of a man spiraling into dangerous obsession. When it was the public defender's turn, he gave a weak performance. He talked about Brandon's trauma, his depression, his adjustment to disability. He called Frank to the stand. Frank, voice cracking, spoke of his son's despair, his remorse, his loneliness. He begged the court for compassion, for mandated therapy instead of a restraining order that would further isolate a broken man. Then the judge did something unexpected. She looked at Brandon. "Mr. Davis, you have heard the allegations. This is a civil matter, but it is a serious one. Before I rule, I would like to hear from you directly. Do you understand why your ex-wife is afraid of you?" Brandon slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, hollow. He looked at me for the first time. Not with hatred or love or even pleading. With a terrible, exhausted emptiness. "I understand," he said, his voice a dry whisper. "I scare myself, Your Honor." The courtroom was silent. "Have you threatened her?" the judge asked. "I sent the texts. I was angry, lost. I have no excuse." "Do you intend to harm her or your child?" He looked down at his hands clenched in his lap. A long pause stretched. I stopped breathing. "No," he finally said, the word a sigh of surrender. "I just wanted her to see me. To see what I had done." He corrected himself, a flicker of painful self-awareness. "I have no right to any of it. The house, the money, my daughter, her." He meant Nora. "I'm just a ghost." The raw, unvarnished defeat in his voice was more powerful than any legal argument. The judge studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Davis, I am granting the permanent restraining order. For a period of 5 years. Your actions, regardless of your mental state, constitute harassment and a credible threat. However," she turned to my attorney, "I am also ordering as a condition that Mr. Davis participate in a comprehensive court-mandated mental health and substance abuse program. The trust fund established for his benefit will be modified to cover these costs. This is not a punishment, Mr. Davis. It is an attempt to address the root cause of your behavior. Do you understand?" He nodded listlessly. "It is also the opinion of this court that supervised visitation, once you have made significant progress in your treatment, would be in the best interest of your daughter. To deny a child any knowledge of a parent, however flawed, is a weighty matter. A reunification therapist will be appointed to assess feasibility in 6 months." My stomach clenched. He was giving him a thread. A tiny, conditional thread back to Nora. Kendra gave me a subtle warning shake of her head. To object would make me look vindictive. The judge banged her gavel. "So ordered." It was over. I had the restraining order, the legal wall. But he had been given a path, not to me, never to me, but to a chance, however slim, at redemption in his daughter's eyes. It was a reckoning for us both. My total victory was denied. His total destruction was stayed. Outside the courtroom, Frank approached me. Susan hovered behind him, weeping silently. "He meant what he said in there, Maya," Frank said, his voice low and urgent. "The ghost part. He's given up. This program, it might be his last chance. For everyone's sake, please. Let him try." I looked past him to where a bailiff was pushing Brandon's wheelchair toward a side exit. His head was bowed, a picture of utter ruin. The man who had driven 600 miles for a dream was now being wheeled away by the state, his future a flowchart of therapy and supervision. He was no longer my husband. He was no longer a threat. He was a case file. "I won't interfere with the court's order," I said, my voice formal and final. "That's all I can promise." I turned and walked away, Kendra at my side. The bright California sun felt harsh, exposing. I had wanted him to live with the consequences. Now I would have to live with them too. The constant low-grade vigilance, the knowledge that he still existed in the same world as my daughter, the tiny court-mandated door left ajar. I had won the war. But the peace was a tense, complicated armistice. As my driver Hector opened the car door for me, I took one last look at the courthouse, a monument to consequences. My revenge was complete. And it tasted like dust and compromise. A year is a long time and no time at all. For Nora, it was the journey from a swaddled bundle to a toddling, babbling force of nature with curls that defied gravity and a laugh that could dissolve my worst day. For me, it was the solidification of a new reality, built on the ashes of the old. Our old house sold quickly. I used the proceeds, combined with my now substantial salary from Continuum, to buy a modern, secure townhouse in a quiet, family-friendly complex in Menlo Park. It had a small, fenced yard and an alarm system that connected directly to Hector's phone. It wasn't the dream home I'd once shared. It was a fortress and a sanctuary, and it was entirely, unequivocally mine. Continuum Strategic was a success. We'd managed 4 major crises with clinical efficiency. My reputation grew not as Brandon Davis's ex-wife, but as Maya Thorne. I'd taken my mother's maiden name, the woman you called when your world was falling apart. The work was demanding, intellectually brutal, and deeply satisfying. It was the opposite of the chaotic, emotional hell I'd survived. It was about applying cold logic to hot messes. James Tran was a demanding but fair partner. The unspoken offer of a more permanent solution for my Brandon problem had never been repeated, but it lingered in the respect he showed me. He knew what I was capable of. Brandon, according to the quarterly reports from the court-appointed trustee, was compliant. He attended his therapy sessions, both group and individual. He'd graduated to a more advanced prosthetic and was reportedly using it consistently. He'd taken a part-time data entry job through a vocational rehab program. The trust fund paid for his modest apartment and treatment. His wages paid for his groceries. He was, by all accounts, a model citizen of his own shattered life. The court-mandated reunification process inched forward. A therapist named Dr. Evans facilitated the first highly supervised introductions between Brandon and Nora. They occurred in a sterile, toy-filled room at a family services center. I was required to be present but in an observation room behind a one-way mirror. The first time was agony. Seeing him hold a board book, his hands, the same hands that had snatched her, that had pushed us, trembling as he tried to point to a picture of a cow, was a surreal violation. Nora, at 18 months, was curious and unafraid. She pointed at his prosthetic leg and said, "Boo-boo?" He had flinched, then nodded, tears in his eyes. "Yeah, baby. A big boo-boo." It was scripted, painful, and profoundly ordinary. There was no lightning bolt of connection, no damning flash of rage. Just a broken man and a toddler, supervised by a professional. After 30 minutes it was over. Dr. Evans's report was clinical. Positive initial contact. No signs of agitation from Mr. Davis. Child was engaged and responsive. Recommended progression to longer, play-based sessions. I hated it. Every cell in my body screamed that he had forfeited this right. But the court, and the part of me that remembered my own father's unwavering presence, argued otherwise. Kendra advised pragmatism. Fighting it now makes you look obstructive. He's jumping through every hoop. Let the process play out. It's slow. It's controlled. And if he screws up once, it ends. So I allowed it. I compartmentalized it like a client's crisis. It was a manageable risk. My social life, what little there was of it, revolved around other mothers from Nora's playgroup and my small, fiercely loyal team at work. I went on a few dates set up by a well-meaning Anya. They were pleasant, forgettable. My capacity for trust felt cauterized. My heart was a boardroom, not a bedroom. The past, however, has a way of resurfacing in the most banal ways. I was grocery shopping one Saturday, Nora in the cart seat, when I turned the aisle and came face to face with Nora Finch. She looked older. The artful bohemian wear was replaced by sleek, expensive athleisure. Her hair was professionally highlighted. She was examining a bottle of cold-pressed juice. For a second we both froze. Then a slow, cat-like smile spread across her face. "Why, or is it Thorne now? I heard about the rebranding. Very chic." "Nora," I said, my voice neutral. I tightened my grip on the cart. She looked Nora over with an artist's appraisal. "She's beautiful. Takes after you, thankfully." Her gaze flicked back to me, sharp and curious. "I heard about Brandon. The restraining order, the psych hold. Quite the fall from grace." "You had a front row seat for the beginning of it," I said. She had the decency to look momentarily abashed, but it was quickly replaced by a shrugging nonchalance. "He was always so intense, so literal. He couldn't separate fantasy from reality." It's a tragic flaw. She said it like she was critiquing a bad piece of pottery. I heard he's trying to get better. Good for him. Why are you here, Nora? I asked, weary of her performance. Just passing through. A gallery showing in San Jose. She leaned in slightly, dropping her voice. You know, I always admired you in a way. You were always so solid. So real. He never deserved that. He wanted a muse, not a partner. She sighed, a theatrical little breath. I hope you found your happiness. I finally found mine. She waved a hand, a diamond the size of a gumdrop flashing on her finger. A collector. He understands the artistic temperament. She was telling me she'd landed another patron. Another great guy. The cycle continued. He would never change. And seeing that, I felt the last vestige of my hatred for her evaporate. She was just a force of nature, amoral and self-serving. Brandon had been a tree in her path. She'd blown past him without a second thought. I'm glad it worked out for you, I said, and to my surprise I almost meant it. Her happiness, built on such shallow foundations, was no threat to me. She seemed almost disappointed by my lack of reaction. With a final, patronizing smile at Nora, she wheeled her cart away, back to her curated life. I stood there among the cereals, feeling a strange sense of closure. The two architects of my nightmare were now fully revealed. One as a pathetic, broken ghost working toward a meager redemption, the other as a beautiful, empty vessel forever chasing the next wind to fill her sails. And I was neither. I was the ground they had once stood on. Thought. The final piece of the new world fell into place on a crisp autumn evening. I was working late, drafting a statement for a CEO caught in an emissions scandal, when James Tran appeared in my doorway. Got a minute? He came in and sat uninvited. He looked uncharacteristically pensive. There's an opportunity, he said. A big one. A Silicon Valley legend is preparing to step down. The succession is messy. Family drama, boardroom coups, the works. It's a 3-year contract, minimum. Total immersion. It would mean relocating your team, you, Anya Rook, to an office in his compound. Essentially becoming his private strategic shadow. It was the biggest pitch of my career. It was also a gilded cage. Where? Atherton. The wealthiest of the wealthy. A world away from everything. And Nora? The compound has a private preschool. Safer than Fort Knox. Hector could transition to full-time security there. He was offering me a pinnacle. Absolute security, immense professional challenge, obscene money. It was also a form of witness protection from my own past. What about Continuum here? I'll run it. This is a separate entity. Your show. He paused. It's also a clean break, Maya. From all of it. He didn't have to specify. The weekly therapy reports, the supervised visitations, the low-grade dread that lived in the back of my mind. In the rarefied air of an Atherton compound, behind gates and guards, Brandon Davis and his court-mandated progress would become irrelevant. The legal visitation order would be harder to enforce across that distance, that level of security. It was an escape hatch disguised as a promotion. I need to think about it, I said. Of course. Take the weekend. I drove home that night, the offer humming in my mind. I put Nora to bed, watching her sleep, her chest rising and falling with the simple, profound truth of her existence. I thought of the sterile visitation room. I thought of Brandon's trembling hands. I thought of the absolute pristine safety of those Atherton gates. And then I thought of the woman I had become. The field marshal. The strategist. The survivor. Did that woman hide behind gates? Or did she stand her ground on the territory she had won? The next morning I called Dr. Evans. I'm considering a relocation for my career. To Atherton. How would that affect the visitation schedule? There was a long silence. It would complicate it significantly, Miss Thorne. Long-distance visitation is difficult to facilitate and often reduces frequency. The court prioritizes the child's stability. A move of that nature for a compelling professional reason could be grounds to petition for a modification, likely to longer, less frequent visits during school breaks. It would be a change. A change. Step back. Not an end but a dilution. I thanked her and hung up. I looked around my townhouse at Nora's toys scattered across the rug, at the sunlight streaming in. This was my ground. I had fought for it. I had bled for it in another life. I called James Tran. James, I'm flattered. It's an incredible offer. But I'm going to decline. He was silent for a beat. May I ask why? The money is. It's not about the money. It's about the principle. I built a life here. I'm not going to let him, or the fear of him, dictate where I live it. Continuum is here. My home is here. My daughter's life is here. We have security. We have the law. That has to be enough. Another pause. Then a chuckle, genuine and warm. You know, when I offered you this job, I thought I was harnessing your ruthlessness. I see now I underestimated your courage. The offer stands indefinitely. If you change your mind. I won't. I hung up and felt a surge of something pure and powerful. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was sovereignty. A few weeks later I took Nora to the park. It was our park in our neighborhood. Hector maintained a discreet distance. Nora was in the sandbox, earnestly filling a bucket. I sat on a bench, letting the ordinary piece of it wash over me. A man on a bench across the way caught my eye. He was reading a newspaper. It was Brandon. He was alone. He was wearing jeans, the line of his prosthetic visible. He looked thinner, older but clean. He wasn't looking at us. He was just there. As if by some awful coincidence. My breath hitched. I was about to signal to Hector when Brandon slowly folded his paper, stood up and began to walk away. He didn't look back. He didn't approach. He just left. It was a test. A demonstration. He was showing me, and perhaps himself, that he could be in the same universe and respect the boundary. That he could see the sun shining on his daughter's hair and walk away. It was the most painful and the most respectful thing he had ever done. He didn't see me wipe a single unexpected tear from my cheek. It wasn't for him. It was for the sheer terrible cost of everything. For the lives lost, his, mine, the one we'd shared, on the long, torturous road to this quiet park bench and this silent retreat. Nora toddled over, sand in her fist. Mama. Look. I scooped her up, burying my face in her sweet, sweaty neck. I see, baby. I see everything. The new world wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was a complex, negotiated piece, etched with scars and watched over by guards. It contained supervised visits and psychiatric reports, a brilliant career built on the ashes of a marriage, and the constant low hum of a past that could never be fully erased. But it was mine. I had chosen it. I defended it every day. And within its complicated, hard-won borders, my daughter played in the sun, safe and loved. That was the victory. Not his destruction but our preservation. Not an ending but a difficult, enduring peace. I held Nora close, watched the empty space where her father had been, and faced forward into the rest of my life. The end.